President Trump has secured a trade deal with the European Union over the weekend. Can Trump's tariffs and trade deals usher in a golden age for America? Good afternoon. I'm Reese Black, and you are watching Filibusted Live. And today we are getting into the details of the EU trade agreement and some of the ramifications that we could see in the United States because of this and similar deals. So, yesterday, Trump announced that they had cut a new deal with the European Union. And the details to this are pretty simple: no tariffs on the United States. So, the European Union will no longer have any tariffs on the United States. We, however, I say we as in a US citizen, we get to put 15% tariffs on the EU. And as well as the EU will be buying $750 billion worth of energy from the United States. And the last bit is the EU will also invest an additional 600 billion beyond its current investments in the United States and will purchase US military equipment. So this is a massive win for the United States. I don't care if you like Trump or if you hate Trump. He has negotiated down a really good deal for us, for the United States. No tariffs on us, 15% tariffs on the EU. And then we have these major investments coming in. This is a simply massive deal. And it could be the beginning of lower taxes and greater prosperity for Americans, which is something I'm going to get into here in just a little bit. But a few more details. This trade deal comes right before an August 1st deadline that Trump has set. So this August 1st deadline, Trump has said tariffs will greatly increase on all countries that do not have deals with the United States before August 1st, which is just a few days from now. So Trump has cut similar deals with other countries recently in the last month. So tentative trade deals currently with China, the UK, the Philippines, and Indonesia. Last week, he also cut a similar deal with Japan. So it's very similar to the EU deal. It includes no tariffs on the United States, 15% tariffs again on Japan, and also commitments from Japan to open its markets to more US goods, as well as invest $550 billion into the United States. So if you put the Japan deal and the EU together, that is nearly $2 trillion of new investment into that's coming into the United States with those two deals together. So for the United States, especially for the government, it means new revenue through these 15% tariffs that we did not have before. And it's also the potential for higher earnings for businesses and individuals through more U.S. exports. Because again, since these countries no longer have tariffs on the United States, and they also have commitments now to buy more from the U.S. to try to even out that trade deficit that Trump's always talking about. Whether you think the trade deficit is a good thing or a bad thing, there definitely is now a potential for businesses and individuals in the U.S. to earn more by shipping more goods outside the United States to the EU and Japan, because they're now cheaper in those countries without having any tariffs on them. And then also you have the foreign investment that could potentially be a cause for higher earnings here in the United States. So I do want to talk about two specific things. We're going to get into some some sort of what ifs and some numbers and some analysis for what could be coming in the future because of some of Trump's grand dreams and promises and things that he wants to do, and how these tariffs and these trade deals all plays into that. And so I'm going to get into those two things, but they are basically the first one is I'm going to talk about how this helps us cover the big beautiful bill shortfall, which I've covered in a previous episode. Explaining how the recent massive omnibus bill did have a budget shortfall. And I'm going to get into that. And this actually helps us cover that. And the last one, of course, is how this plays into the larger plan of Trump wanting to eliminate federal income tax and whether or not that's actually possible. So I forgot to click a couple articles here. This one, of course, is that announcement with Japan. And so we're going to talk about the big, beautiful bill shortfall here. So this is a whole episode that we did when the Senate passed the big, beautiful bill, the Senate and the House together. And if you go check out this episode, you can go see all the tax cuts that were in it and the new spending and all that kind of thing. But one of the things I described is, of course, since they cut lots of taxes and also increased the spending, that meant that we had now a budget shortfall. So according to the Congressional Budget Office, this shortfall was going to add $3.3 trillion of debt over the next 10 years. So it sounds really bad. But as I explained in this video, that's not actually the full story. Because if you account for all the other things that Trump is and the Trump administration has been doing, we've actually already made up for a lot of that shortfall. So I'm going to pull up my Excel sheet that I had for this episode. And let's get into the numbers here. And then we're going to be able to compare them to what they are kind of now with some of the new tariff information that we have going on here. So what I did in that episode is I broke down, like I said, there's a $3.3 trillion deficit over the next 10 years. And this estimate comes from the Congressional Budget Office. So what I did was I was like, okay, well, that's a big number. Let's break it down by year. So over the next 10 years, we're $330 billion short from this new bill that was passed in Congress, right? But as you can see here, the other things that Trump's administration has been doing has already been eating away at that shortfall. So we had 170 billion saved by Doge. At the time, we had 50 billion additional money brought in from tariffs when I did this analysis, and then we had another 5 billion raised from selling Visa Gold cards, which is one of Trump's initiatives to sell travel visas to the United States at $5 million a pop. And so what this equaled was we had basically around $100 billion shortfall we had to somehow make up for, right, for the rest of the year. Well, these numbers are actually looking a lot better for us here. So this, like I said, that $50 billion in tariffs, that's an old number. And I just got the updates today. This is pretty crazy. In the last 2 months, each month, we've raised $20 billion additional money in tariffs just in the last couple of months. So this tariff account money has actually been going up and up. And the estimate right now is by the end of the year, we're going to have $240 billion raised from tariffs. That's on top of last year's money. So there's $240 billion more dollars, right, in tariffs. And so if you take that into account, this $100 billion that we had left, this is actually wiped out. And Trump's initiative now has actually put us $100 billion into the green. So if you count Doge, the tariffs, and the budget bill together, count all these three things together, we are actually now with this estimate, we're going to raise $240 billion in tariffs by the end of the year for the entire year. And that's additional new money. We're actually $100 billion on top. And this, again, is without any further Doge cuts, and it's without any more sales of those Visa cards that I mentioned. Every time I say Visa cards, it makes me think of the credit cards, the Visas, not Visa cards, not a credit card. We're not selling credit cards, selling Visas in the United States. And so the summary of all this that I'm going to get into why this matters, right, is that right now, again, Doge and tariffs are paying for that big, beautiful bill budget shortfall that I was concerned about on a previous episode. The tariffs are definitely paying for them. Doge cuts are definitely paying for them, plus $100 billion surplus. So the next time you see a news article saying that big, beautiful bill and the things that Trump has done and the tax cuts are putting us in debt, take all of these things into consideration, the Doge cuts, as well as the extra revenue being raised by tariffs, and a few other things that we're going to get into in a little bit. So like I said, we're sitting at a $100 billion surplus now, thanks to these extra tariffs. And I just think that's pretty fascinating. So what is the bigger picture? Where does this go? How is this going to help Americans? Well, let's look at a little promise, just a wee bit promise that Trump has, something that he's floating, an idea he's floating that he seems to be very serious about. And we'll see. We'll see how serious he is, but he's talked about it a lot. Before I get into that, though, I just want to recount a little thing about taxes. Okay, so we're going to talk about the income tax. So I'm sure everyone's probably heard, especially Americans, have all heard the term "no taxation without representation," right? And this was, of course, part of the reason for the Revolutionary War, the reason why the American colonies rebelled against England. And so the American Revolutionary War was largely fought over the British government taxing colonists. Now, to be fair, it was a lot less actually about the taxes themselves. The taxes were a big deal, but the bigger deal was that they did not have representation in Parliament to vote on those taxes on their behalf. So the colonists weren't being represented in parliament. They didn't have anybody they could vote for that was representing their interests. And so that was actually the bigger deal. And they were afraid that, and there was also a few other things as well. The British were controlling the American economy, what they could sell and produce and stuff like that in other ways besides just taxes that were making them angry. But putting that aside for a second, I just want to talk about the taxes themselves because this is kind of nuts. So the taxes themselves that were making the colonists angry, the estimates that I found was they were paying on average about 1.5% of their income in taxes. 1.5%, which by today's numbers it would be an insane thing for us to think to fight a revolution over. And so again, it wasn't just the taxes. There was other things going on there as well. But just for comparison, we now pay on estimates, on average, 20 times more in taxes. The 30% is the average. And that can go up and down depending on if you live in a high tax area with, like your local taxes are a lot higher in your state and that sort of thing, depending on what your bracket is for your federal income tax. But 30% is the overall average, and that's overall. That's your income tax, that's your property tax, local taxes, that's everything taken into account. It's about 30%, right? And so again, that's 20 times more than the taxes that were making the original Americans so upset that they had to fight a war over it, right? And so let's get into well, before I get into Trump's promise or one of Trump's goals, I do want to just point out the fact that I believe that the higher taxes have been detrimental to American culture. So the introduction of the income tax, which is new, it's new for us, introduced in the last 100 or so years. I say new. Our country's still only like a couple hundred years old, but still, originally we didn't have the income tax. That was a newer thing that has introduced and has gone up and up and up over the last 100 years or so. Rising taxes in general, and then also high inflation. Inflation is, of course, a hidden tax caused by too much government spending. These things have made it far too expensive for the average American to take risks and follow their dreams. I point this out because I believe this is fundamentally actually hurting American culture. So America has always been known as a place where anyone can start from basically nothing. And if they work hard and they're creative, you can create a small fortune for yourself, basically provide for your family, and there's opportunities to go around. And this has always largely been possible because we've always had lower taxes and lower regulations here compared to other places in the world, as well as rich resources and other sorts of opportunities. But that's just part of the bigger piece of the pie. Low taxes, low regulations have made these things possible. So we have, in the last 100 years, of course, added on more and more taxes, regulations, and inflation has increased as government spending has increased. So we've lost a lot of our vibrant small business economy and family-owned economy. And my pet peeve is that we have gone more and more towards just large international corporations, and we're losing kind of like the soul of local businesses, local economies, where people just have, the barriers of entry are low enough that you can, with a few $100s, just go out and start a business, start doing whatever you want to do, and see, and there's opportunity there for that. But when the barrier of entry is higher because of high inflation, high taxes, all those kinds of things, the only people that can afford to operate are massive international corporations that have the money and the resources to survive with high taxes and also to skirt around some things. So what am I talking about this for? The reason I'm talking about this is because I have a dream that Trump's dream maybe will eventually become a reality. So Trump has talked about this idea that he wants no taxes if you earn less than 150K. This is Donald Trump's plan. Now, of course, he's talking about no federal income tax. So this was back in March. Trump's Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, said, I know what Trump's goal is. His goal is Trump, no tax for anybody making under $150,000 a year. That's what I'm working for. So we have the Commerce Secretary describing this plan to remove the federal income tax for anybody who makes less than $150,000 a year. That's about 90% of Americans make less than $150,000 a year. I'm definitely in that category of less than $150,000 a year. And so that would mean the removal of the federal income tax, whatever your current bracket is that you're paying. And Lutnick said there's two ways that they're going to do this to be able to make up for it. One is, of course, tariffs are going to help them make up for the shortfall in taxes. And the other one, which is honestly a common thing that we're seeing with this administration, is trying to remove fraud by tackling overseas tax evasion problems. So we've probably all heard about people moving their money around and their businesses and things to try to avoid tax evasion, essentially. And so if the government's going to crack down on this sort of thing, then of course that's going to assist for them to be able to keep pulling in revenue from people that make over 150,000 a year and are just hiding it and trying to, stick it on offshore accounts and all that kind of stuff. So this is the question, and I love this. This article right here says this isn't possible, but I'm going to get into this. Is it really possible to do away with the federal income tax on individuals? We've had it for so long. The government depends on it. I'm going to pull up a chart here in a second and talk about it, that half of the federal income comes from individual income taxes, right? That's half the money that they collect. And so that's a lot of money. And so could this even be possible? I believe it could be possible, but we're going to get into this article here, which I thought was pretty informative, that talks about why it's not possible. But then I'm going to poke a couple holes in it, right? So I do think it's definitely possible to remove the tax, the federal income tax specifically, on anyone making less than $150,000 a year. But let's get into why this article thinks that this is going to be a problem. So I just think this is really fascinating. So it gives us some pretty useful numbers here. First up is the $2.2 trillion number here. So $2.2 trillion a year is how much the federal government brings in an individual income tax. That's gone up a little bit. That was 2.2 back in 2023, right? And I was like, okay, so that's a lot of money, and that all has to be replaced. $2.2 trillion all has to be replaced if we're doing away with this, right? And so how much money can we bring in with tariffs? I thought this was kind of interesting. Down here, they said that they had there's a third party, Peterson Institute for International Economics, right, that did this study, and they found that this is their estimates, this is their outcome here, that basically if you want to gather as much money as you can for the government just through tariffs and not concerned about trade and stuff like that, but you literally just like tariffs are for gathering money. The best way to gather money through tariffs would be to put 50% tariffs on everything, because that would get you to the point where you're gathering lots of money from tariffs, but it doesn't push you over where people stop selling you goods because their goods are too expensive and they're never going to be able to be bought in your market, until where eventually if your tariffs go high enough, you're not going to be gathering very many tariffs because no one's selling you anything because your citizens can't buy it because it's too expensive, right? So if we did that, 50% tariffs on everything, we could gather $780 billion a year, right? Which is much less. That's not even half of the 2 trillion that we're pulling in. So this article says it's impossible. Even if we maxed out tariffs, we would never be able to collect enough money to replace the $2.2 trillion in income taxes, which makes a good point. However, there are some pretty major flaws with this, and I'm going to get into it here. But of course, we have an even bigger issue that I have to tackle, because we are not making $780 billion in tariffs. That would be if we had 50% tariffs on everything, which we don't. As I just talked about earlier, the deals that Trump is cutting are 15% tariffs on countries like the EU and Japan and several other countries. I know we do have some 50% tariffs, I think, on like steel right now and stuff like that, but that's not going to be a universal number, and it's not going to be on all countries. If countries keep cutting these, if Trump keeps cutting these deals with countries, our tariffs are going to be at like 15%. And so that's definitely not happening. We're not pulling in 780 billion. Like our estimate from earlier is $240 billion in tariffs this year. Sorry, that's additional. $240 billion additional from what we usually gather, right? So we're not hitting this number. So how on earth could this work? Well, it's important to point out here that Trump only wants to remove the income tax on those making less than $150,000. So that article before was a little misleading, because that number was as if everybody was not paying the income tax. So only the top 10% of earners in the United States would still be paying the income tax, Well, let's take a little look at the numbers here. Right down here. If the top 10% was paying the income tax still, you would be looking at $1.5 trillion still being pulled in by the income tax. Okay. So now we don't have to make up for $2.2 trillion. We have now we're actually only have to make up $700 billion, right? So if we can come up with $700 billion a year, anybody making less than 150K will never have to pay federal income taxes again. Okay. So that's the number that I'm working with. It would be much harder if we completely do away with the federal income tax. Yeah, that's going to be a lot harder because the top 10% of earners, their income tax pays for a whopping $1.5 trillion of the budget, right? And so that would be a much harder number to come up with. But if we wanted to do away with the income tax for the 90% of the rest of the people in the United States, we could. That's only 700 billion a year, right? And so if we can come up with 700 billion a year, then would no more taxes for anybody making less than 150K. So let's see, how can we do this? I like Excel sheets, so I pulled up another Excel sheet. So just again, a little summary here with numbers to make it easy for everybody. We're right now looking at doing away with $700 billion in government revenue by canceling the federal income tax for anyone making less than 150K. And as I talked about earlier, we are already on our way to essentially pay this off because we have $100 billion surplus. And remember that surplus comes from Doge and tariffs minus the the big beautiful bill shortfall, that which eats up a lot of that. But minus the big beautiful bill shortfall, we still have $100 billion extra dollars coming in this year thanks to Doge cuts and thanks to the additional tariffs that we're going to gather. So that only leaves us with $600 billion. So if we can raise $600 billion additional dollars a year, we can actually realistically do away with the federal income tax. And so, what other options do we have? We've talked about some of these before in the past. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I just think this is really interesting. And I'd like to see y'all's comments below when I finish this stream of what you think the best ideas are for continuing to raise this kind of money in creative ways or ways that the government can cut spending. Because when I say raise money, it actually goes both ways. We don't just have to make new money. We could also just cut more things. So here's some options for things that are actually already happening that are actually could probably help us get to this $600 billion a year. So first up is we haven't even talked about the results from Trump's trade deals that could equal having a larger tax base. Larger tax base means, we're bringing in more revenue on that, the people that are making 150K. Also, there's still like corporation tax, all that kind of stuff, other kinds of taxes going on. And so the first bit, of course, is lower tariffs on the United States means we're exporting more U.S. goods. If you're exporting more U.S. goods, that's good for U.S. business. So tax base increases, right? The second one that comes with these trade deals, as I already talked about, was a large foreign investment. Now we have $2 trillion just from two countries, Japan and the EU. That doesn't count any other deals that we're making with other countries. We have over $2 trillion or nearly $2 trillion being invested into the United States. So greater chance of returns. And that also increases the tax base, right? So when you do things like that, that just help out the economy, it ends up helping out the government by increasing the tax base. So that could help with the 600 billion that we need to raise. I also mentioned this before on a previous episode, but the big beautiful bill, besides introducing new spending and having a budget shortfall, it also increased drilling and mining on public land, which probably hasn't started yet in earnest, but it opened up the door for that to start. And this is kind of like a pattern that we're seeing that now this administration is basically positioning itself to try to lease public land, or I don't know exactly the details of how it works, but the money that they make off of these drilling and mining deals, when you open up the public land and the companies have to pay you fees and stuff to be able to, or lease it out to be able to drill there. This also includes, offshore drilling. I've seen we did an episode on this recently about the massive mineral deposits just west of the United States out in the Pacific Ocean. Trump wants to increase drilling over there. And that could also be, opening up new revenue streams, essentially, that are all getting taxed in some way or another to help us chip away at this amount. Um, I mentioned before Trump's golden visas that are being sold at 5 million each. We have raised 5 billion so far. That was months ago. Was the estimate was 5 billion in a single day. I haven't seen any estimates coming out since, but if we continue to be able to sell these things, the max amount of money that could be made selling these is $50 trillion. That's one time, and that's the absolute max. But that's an enormous, enormous amount of money. That's enough to start wiping out the debt, I believe. Oh, that would wipe out the debt if we were, but that's a like if every super wealthy person in the world purchased one of these essentially that lives outside the United States. So that's probably not going to happen. But, say if 20% of them did, we're still looking at like a massive amount of revenue pulling in from that one. And then, of course, we have continued spending cuts is always an option. There's lots of ways that we can continue to cut down spending, and that's money that we no longer have to raise. And then I would like to see y'all's comments and ideas for more creative solutions. I'm sure our team will probably talk about some more. Doug gave me some ideas for the more creative solutions that I honestly didn't fully understand, that had a lot to do with like government stable coin and things like that. So those are some interesting solutions that we might see coming about. But I did just want to highlight this number because I just thought it was really interesting, because you will continue to see, I saw some articles, people saying doing away with the income tax is like the Republicans' new pipe dream, essentially. Like it's this impossible thing that could never happen, but it's like, well, we operated as a country for more than 100 years without having any income tax at all. When the income tax began, it was, I don't remember the number, but it was very small, and it was intended to just be temporary to like, I believe, kind of speaking off the top of my head right now, but I believe it was introduced to pay for some of the things that they were doing during the Great Depression, like the massive government investments in public infrastructure and stuff like that. And it was supposed to be temporary. It was supposed to go away eventually. But as we all know, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. And so that was kind of like what we're left with is like, there's so many politicians that think, well, there's no way we could ever pay for the government without having the income tax. But I do. So that's why I just thought this analysis was kind of interesting, because at first I was thinking, well, maybe they're right. But I started looking at the numbers today, and I just, from a little bit of analysis, I'm like, I think this is actually possible. I really don't think it's too much to say we can raise $600 billion more dollars a year, or cut, with the raising or cutting. There's some way that we could make up for this and no longer have to pay income tax. I think we're well on the way to making that happen. So almost at the 30-minute mark, but I do want to just kind of end with like a little bit of a quick patriotic rant here. So I'm talking about the income tax a lot. I do think, of course, that this would be a massive boon to the United States. It would help a lot of people. Anybody making less than 150K, I think this would be the quickest, easiest way that the government could help them to be able to afford their lives better, because it's not more government spending or a new government plan or something that actually just ends up rising inflation. It's simply just you get to keep more of your money. We're just taking away this massive tax burden that you have. And I'm excited to see if the Trump administration can keep cutting spending or finding new creative ways that can fully replace the income tax. Because again, I don't think that tariffs by themselves are going to be able to completely do this. But if you combine all these things together, including the increased economic benefit of these deals that Trump's doing and the investment here in the United States, then I believe that you could get to that number of 600 billion additional a year. I forgot. I do want to mention, though, their small reality check to all this stuff is that we do eventually, of course, need to chip away at the debt problem. Of course, I've had the debt issue sitting down here at the bottom of the screen. We are still spending like, what is this, $500 billion a year just on interest. And so if we could start chipping away at this debt problem, in order to do that, we're going to have to raise more than just simply $600 billion a year and do away with the income tax. If you did that, and we'd still be sitting at a difficult location. And so just a small reality check to all this exciting numbers. It's like, okay, this is going to get us to doing away with the income tax, but we still need to solve the debt issue. But I think it's really, the answer is just more of the same. If you do away with, continue doing away with some of these taxes, allowing the economy to grow, increasing the tax base, and just being wiser with the money the government has, I do believe that this is still possible, even with a little bit of the damper there of like, oh yeah, we still have the debt kind of looming over us. But so my patriotic rant, of course, is I just want to point out that this kind of is about the money, but it's also not about the money itself at the same time. I hate the way that a lot of people talk about the economy as if it was like the economy is just a measure of like impersonal finance, essentially. The economy is a term that represents all human lives in our country, and also ones that are connected to our country. It's all the activity that we as humans do, all the choices that we make just happens to be represented usually in dollar amounts, but it's human activity, it's human lives, right? It's our livelihoods, it's the choices that we make, it's where we move and live, and the taxes that we pay, and all the decisions and things that kind of go into that. As I said before, American culture has always been one of freedom. And this includes economic freedom. It has to include economic freedom because economic freedom means that you have options. It means you have opportunities for you and your family. It means you have money to purchase a house. It means that if you want to, you can move cities or move states just because you want to go somewhere new or because it's a better opportunity for you. If you don't have economic freedom, then you can't even do that. You can't even decide there's something I want to do. You just have to stick with your current situation, right? You can start your own business if you're so inclined, or at the very least, you're guaranteed that if you develop a valuable skill, there's always going to be an employer who's willing to pay well for that skill because the economy is booming and there's plenty of opportunities. And so that is all, of course, only works if we have a certain, if there's a low enough threshold of costs and expenses to be able to get into any of those opportunities. So low taxes strengthens the heart of America. That's what I'm trying to say here. It allows us to have livable communities everywhere based in small businesses and local economies instead of just large international corporations, like I mentioned earlier. The higher taxes go and the more the barrier of entry is for business, it changes our culture. It changes it from a culture of opportunity, and you can start things locally. You can just look around and say, what's a need that needs to happen? Okay, I'm going to start a business tomorrow and start addressing that need and providing value for people. Like, you have the option to do that if there's low enough taxes. If not, you really don't have the option to, because you know that it's going to be too hard for you to get into, and doing that, it's going to be too expensive. And so you're stuck with basically working for an international corporation, and you don't have any other, if you can get a job there, and you don't have any other options. So low taxes supports the kind of America I want to see. And I'm hoping that we can actually make this no income tax dream a reality. It still does feel a little bit like a pipe dream, but after looking at these numbers today, I feel like we're closer than we've probably been in the past, especially having an administration that seems so set on actually making it happen and has done such a good job with some of the deals with the current uh, current countries. As always, I don't know. I try to be as balanced as I can. Some days I feel like I'm kind of like glazing and talking up Trump and the Trump administration. Other days I feel like I'm heavily criticizing Trump and the Trump administration. But that's just the way I like to be. I don't feel like I need to be 100% pro Trump or 100% anti Trump. I just think that's silly. I try to address the things that are happening and try to talk about things that I like, showing you why I like them. And if Trump's doing anything I don't like, there's plenty of things I've talked about. Go see previous episodes. I feel like he's kind of won me over a little bit with the tariff issue. I used to not like tariffs, and I feel like he's doing a good job with the tariffs and the deals that he's cutting. It's definitely kind of, the numbers have kind of pushed me over into thinking like, actually, I think he might know what he's talking about with tariffs. Originally, I was pretty anti-tariff. So that's something I kind of changed my mind on. So if you want to keep seeing this kind of analysis, tune back in next week. My solo live stream is going to be on Monday again, as always. And I'm not sure. I think Doug might be out this week. So either Troy or Doug will be covering the live stream tomorrow in the afternoon as well. And thanks for tuning in. Again, let me know your ideas for how we can get the country back on track financially. How do we pay off this debt? How do we cut spending and raise our revenue for our government in creative ways besides income taxes? And yeah, I want to see those comments below. And until next time, God bless.